So here we are, Avengers Doomsday, a film that doesn't come out until December of 2026, and yet somehow the internet has already dissected it, theorised about it, argued over it, and in some corners of fandom already declared it either the greatest superhero film ever made or a cynical cash grab, and nobody's actually seen a single frame of it yet. That's kind of impressive, honestly. That's the MCU at its most, MCU. There's something I actually enjoy about this part of the cycle, though. The before part. Before the film exists and settles into whatever it ends up being, there's this window where everything is still possible. Where the theories live, where a leaked concept art image or a throwaway comment from Kevin Feige in a press junket can send 1,000 Reddit threads spinning off in entirely different directions. I like that window, and tonight felt like a good night to just wander around in it for a while. Because there is a lot to wander through. What they're attempting with Avengers, Doomsday is genuinely unlike anything the franchise has done before. And I don't say that as marketing copy, I mean it structurally. 3 separate movie universes, heroes from timelines that have never shared a screen, a villain played by the actor who essentially built this franchise, and a story that, if the leaks and theories are even half right, doesn't end with the heroes winning. At least not in the conventional sense, not in the way we're used to. We'll talk through all of it. We'll start with Dr. Doom himself, who he is, why the casting of Robert Downey Jr. is stranger and more interesting than it probably first appeared, and what his backstory seems to be in this film. Then we'll get into the 3 universes that are colliding, Earth 616, the Fantastic Four's world, and an X-Men universe, and what it actually means for universes to collide, because that's not just a dramatic phrase, it has a specific, somewhat terrifying meaning in Marvel's cosmology. We'll talk about incursions, about the theory that Steve Rogers' quiet retirement at the end of Endgame accidentally broke something, about what Doom's plan actually is, which turns out to be more complicated and more melancholy than your standard take over the world setup. We'll get into the TVA and Loki, and what a man who spent 2 seasons learning to care about something is apparently going to have done to him. And we'll spend some time on Battleworld, what that patchwork remade reality might actually look and feel like, and what it sets up for Secret Wars. And then at the end, we'll go through a few of the wilder theories, the ones that are almost certainly wrong, but are genuinely fun to think about. If you want to support the channel, there's a link in the description where you can do that. It helps more than you'd think. But either way, get comfortable. This one's going to take a while, and that's entirely the point. Now, Dr. Doom. Let's start there because everything else flows out of understanding who this person actually is. Victor Von Doom is, in the comics, one of the most layered villains Marvel has ever produced. And I think people who know him only from the old Fantastic Four films, the ones from the mid-2000s, where he was mostly just a guy in silver armour being shouty, would be genuinely surprised by how much is going on with the character when he's written well. He's the monarch of Latveria, a small fictional Eastern European nation that under his rule is actually pretty peaceful and well governed. He provides for his people. He's not a warlord burning things down for the fun of it. He's a king, and he takes that seriously. He also happens to be one of the most brilliant scientific minds in the Marvel Universe, and one of its most powerful sorcerers simultaneously, which is an unusual combination even by superhero standards. Most characters get to be one thing. Doom is 2 very different kinds of exceptional, and he carries both with complete self-possession. What makes him genuinely interesting, though, is the self-image. Doom doesn't think he's a villain. He never has. He thinks he's the only person in the world with both the intelligence and the will to do what needs to be done. He thinks Reed Richards is arrogant. He thinks the Avengers are reactive, small-minded, capable of responding to threats but incapable of preventing them. And in a lot of the better Doom storylines, you finish reading and find yourself thinking, he's not entirely wrong about any of that, is he? That's the thing about the best Marvel villains. They have a point. They've just chosen a method of addressing it that everyone around them finds catastrophic. Compare that to Thanos, who wanted balance and thought wiping out half of life was a mathematically elegant solution. Or Loki, who mostly wanted recognition and kept finding increasingly disastrous ways to seek it. Doom doesn't want balance. He doesn't particularly want recognition. He wants control, ordered, stable, permanent control, because he genuinely believes the universe is too chaotic and too dangerous to be left to chance and committees. Now add Robert Downey Jr. to that, which, when it was first announced, felt, and I think it's fair to say this, a bit confusing, because we have 15 plus years of emotional investment in RDJ as Tony Stark, as the person who started all of this, who died for it. The idea of him coming back as someone else, someone on the other side of the conflict, seemed like it risked being distracting at best and cheap at worst. And then you sit with it for a moment and you start to see what they might be doing. Because Tony Stark and Victor Von Doom are, in the comics, deeply comparable figures, both genius-level technologists, both men whose defining characteristic is a kind of supreme self-confidence that the world has mostly validated, both men who built something extraordinary to protect themselves and ended up using it to try and protect everyone. The difference is that Tony eventually learned to share, to trust, to sacrifice, and Doom never did. Doom looked at the same kind of intelligence and capability and arrived at a completely different conclusion about what it was for. So RDJ playing Doom isn't just a stunt casting, it's a thematic statement. What if Tony Stark had never learned to let go? What if all that brilliance had curdled into control instead of opening into sacrifice? There's also, of course, the physical reality of it. Doom wears a mask, a metal mask, after a catastrophic accident, which we'll get into properly when we talk about his backstory in this film. He is armoured, hidden, his face a fixed iron expression, rather than the readable, mobile face RDJ has always used so effectively. That's interesting. That's taking one of the most expressive actors in the franchise and putting him behind something immovable. Whatever Doom feels, you won't be able to see it. The confirmed production details are worth noting. The Russo brothers are back directing, their first time since Endgame. Stephen McFeely, who co-wrote every one of the Russo's MCU films, is on the screenplay alongside Michael Waldron, who wrote the Loki series, and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. The film is shooting back-to-back with Avengers Secret Wars. Kevin Feige has described the two films as a beginning, which is a slightly unsettling thing to say about what is also clearly meant to be an ending of sorts. And then there's the moment from the Fantastic Four, First Steps mid-credits scene that I keep coming back to. Sue Richards has just had her baby, Franklin. 4 years pass in a time jump. Sue steps out of the room, leaving the child with his picture books. She comes back. Standing in the nursery with her infant son is a figure in a flowing green cloak, holding a metal mask, looking at the child. And the child isn't afraid, he's just watching this stranger with curious, calm eyes. That's Doctor Doom. That's the image the MCU chose to introduce him with. Before the trailers, before the press junkets, before any of the theory discourse. A quiet room, a child with incomprehensible power, and a man who noticed. One fun detail worth mentioning: when Marvel announced the cast for Doomsday via a live stream, the camera slowly panned over empty chairs, with actors' names on them. The whole thing took about 5 hours. People watched the entire thing. That's the kind of patient, devoted attention this franchise still commands, even after a few rougher years of output. Whatever you think about the current state of Marvel, that level of investment from the audience is genuinely something. Kevin Feige confirmed it himself. Avengers. Doomsday takes place across 3 distinct universes, and when he says that, he means 3 universes that have their own histories, their own rules, their own heroes, who have never shared a screen with each other before. That is an ambitious thing to attempt even by the standards of a franchise that once thought putting Thor and a guy in a mechanical suit in the same film was a reasonably complicated character introduction. Let's just walk through what those three universes actually are, because I think it's worth being clear about this rather than assuming everyone has the same mental model going in. The first is Earth 616, which is the main EMCU timeline, the world that's been building since Iron Man in 2008. Where we left things after the Phase 5 and 6 films, Sam Wilson has taken up the Captain America mantle, Shuri is the new Black Panther. The Thunderbolts, Yelena Belova, Bucky Barnes, Ghost, Red Guardian, US Agent, and the Sentry have apparently been rebranded as the New Avengers by the time Doomsday begins. Loki is the god of stories, holding the multiverse together from the Citadel at the end of time. This is the world that's been accumulating for the better part of 2 decades of storytelling. The second universe is Earth 828, the Fantastic Four's world. This is the retro-futurist universe from First Steps, set in a version of the 1960s that has flying cars and space stations and an aesthetic that feels closer to a World Fair exhibit than a modern superhero film. Reed Richards, Sue Storm, Johnny Storm, and Ben Grimm have been the world's first public superheroes in that universe for some years. Their child Franklin was just born. Their world has its own distinct texture and history, separate from anything the Avengers ever did. The full Fantastic Four cast crosses over: Pedro Pascal, Vanessa Kirby, Eben Moss-Backrack, Joseph Quinn. The third universe is the Fox X-Men timeline, and this is the one that, honestly, still feels slightly surreal to say out loud. Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier, Ian McKellen as Eric Lehnsherr Magneto, Rebecca Romijn as Mystique, James Marsden as Cyclops, Alan Cumming as Nightcrawler, Kelsey Grammer as Hank McCoy, Beast. These actors originated these roles in X-Men in the year 2000. Stewart and McKellen are in their 80s now. There's something about that fact that I find quietly moving before we've even discussed a single plot point. These characters, in the hands of these same performers, are finally arriving in a story big enough to contain them properly. According to reports, the state of the X-Men universe at the point Doomsday begins is this: Magneto has apparently achieved his dream. He's finally ruling Genosha, the mutant homeland from the comics, and has built his utopia. His royal family reportedly includes variants of Wanda and Pietro Maximoff. He's done it. Eric got what he always wanted, which makes whatever is about to happen to that world particularly grim. Now, when Figa says these universes are colliding, he means that literally in terms of the story's mechanics. But there's also a thematic collision happening that I think is worth naming. Each of these three universes represents a different philosophy of what a superhero is and what heroism is for. Earth 616 heroes are post-Snap, post-Endgame, post-everything. They've been through a kind of collective trauma that's reshaped how they think about loss and legacy. The Fantastic Four are idealistic explorers, scientists, a family that faces the unknown together. That's a fundamentally different orientation, and the X-Men have always been about the politics of difference, about the cost of being other, about whether the world they're protecting will ever actually accept them. Putting those three worldviews in contact with each other under enormous pressure is the kind of thing that could make for a genuinely interesting film, even before a single action sequence. And here's what I keep thinking about with the Fox X-Men's inclusion specifically. Those films ran from 2000 to 2019, almost 20 years. They had their own continuity, their own internal contradictions, their own beloved moments that fans have carried for a long time. Bryan Singer's original films, Days of Future Past, Logan, there's a whole separate emotional history there. Bringing those actors into the MCU is not just a plot mechanic, it's Marvel acknowledging that those stories existed and mattered, that they're part of this larger tapestry, even if the stitching had to wait this long to show. The one notable absence from that X-Men contingent which I'll flag here and come back to later, is Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds. Wolverine and Deadpool are unconfirmed for Doomsday. Whether they're being hidden by Marvel for a surprise reveal, or whether they genuinely aren't in the film, is one of the more active theories in the fandom right now. Given how central Wolverine is to the Fox X-Men legacy, his absence from the confirmed cast list is either very deliberate misdirection or an interesting storytelling choice. But talking a bit more about what actually causes these universes to meet in the first place, that's where the story's engine really is, and it has a name. The word incursion got introduced to MCU audiences in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and I remember it landing in the film in a way that felt almost like a footnote at the time. A piece of terminology the Illuminati used when they were explaining to Strange why they were considering executing him. It felt like setup, foreshadowing for something larger. And as it turns out, yes, that's exactly what it was. An incursion, in the context of how the EMCU has defined it, is what happens when the boundary between two parallel universes weakens and those universes begin to collapse into each other. One or both get destroyed in the process. It's not a portal, it's not a gateway, it's more like two soap bubbles pressing against each other and then bursting. A catastrophic structural failure at the level of reality itself. The Illuminati and Multiverse of Madness accuse Strange of having caused one by dreamwalking, by possessing the body of an alternate version of himself across dimensional lines. The act of a consciousness from one universe actively occupying and influencing another creates a kind of friction, a fault line between realities. Do it too often or with enough force and the damage becomes irreparable. Now, according to the most credible leaks circulating ahead of Doomsday, the film opens with the heroes of Earth-616 becoming aware that incursions are already happening. And the person who apparently figures this out first is Shuri, which honestly makes a lot of narrative sense. She's spent years developing technology that interfaces with quantum and dimensional physics. Vibranium's properties have always had an almost metaphysical dimension to them in the MCU's science. And she's the right kind of methodical, probe-everything mind to notice anomalies that others might dismiss or not know to look for. The reported setup has her presenting her findings to Sam Wilson, Wong, and others via hologram, warning them that the fabric of reality between universes is starting to fracture. What's interesting about incursions as a story engine is that they don't require a villain to initiate them. They can simply happen. Universes brushing up against each other through accumulated dimensional interference, through the ongoing chaos of multiversal travel and magic and quantum manipulation that the EMCU has been building across the last several years of films and shows. The snap, the time heist, the quantum realm, the TVA's entire history of pruning and branching timelines. Doctor Strange's dreamwalking, Wanda's hex reality, America Chavez punching through dimensional walls. The EMCU has been generating incursion risk events for years, and nobody's been keeping score in a systematic way. And that's where Doom enters the picture, not just as an antagonist, but as a character with a point of view. Because according to the rumoured backstory, he's been keeping score. He's been watching these fault lines develop. He's been trying to understand what's causing them, and what, if anything, can be done. And his solution to the problem is where his character becomes genuinely complicated. But before we get to Doom's plan specifically, there's one particular incursion-causing event that the theories have zeroed in on as the probable origin of this whole mess. And it involves a quiet decision a very old man made at the end of a very big battle, sitting on a bench in the 1950s. Since we're already talking about the structural causes of incursions, it's the right moment to get into the Steve Rogers theory, because it's one of the more emotionally interesting pieces of Doomsday speculation out there. At the end of Avengers Endgame, after Tony Stark's snap and the battle and all the grief of it, Steve Rogers goes back in time to return the Infinity Stones to the points in history where they were borrowed. A practical errand, essentially. And then, instead of coming back, he stays. He lives out a full life in the past, marrying Peggy Carter, growing old together, choosing the quiet over the war. He appears at the end as an old man, passing his shield to Sam Wilson. It's presented as a peaceful, earned ending. He got to have the life that the war took from him. And for years that's how it read. Beautiful, bittersweet, a hero finally at rest. What the Doomsday theory suggests, drawing from leaked plot details, is that Steve's decision to remain in a branching timeline, to live as a man from another universe, settled permanently into a reality that wasn't originally his, created exactly the kind of dimensional fault line that causes incursions. Not dramatically, not immediately, but over decades, the presence of a person who fundamentally doesn't belong to a universe creates a quiet stress fracture in the walls of that reality. And that fracture, in the timeline where Victor Von Doom lived, led to an incursion. Doom's universe collided with another, and people died because of it. According to what's been reported about the film's backstory, Doom didn't start as a villain. He started as someone trying to solve a problem that nobody else around him could see clearly or cared to address seriously. He had the intelligence to detect the incursion risk. He had the resources to run experiments aimed at understanding and preventing it. And one of those experiments went catastrophically wrong. His family died in the failure. He was disfigured, hence the mask, hence the armour. And the cause of the initial incursion that set all of this in motion, he apparently traced back to Steve Rogers. So when Chris Evans appears in Doomsday, his return confirmed to significant audience reaction, and eventually comes face to face with Doom, the confrontation is not just hero meets villain in the conventional sense. It's Steve Rogers standing in front of a man whose life was destroyed by the downstream consequences of a choice Steve made with entirely good intentions. That's not comfortable territory. The EMCU doesn't always sit in that kind of moral complexity, but when it does, when it's the Russo brothers doing it, it tends to land. There's another layer to this, which is the theory around the re-release of Avengers Endgame. Marvel confirmed that Endgame is being re-released in September 2026 with new footage, and the filmmakers specifically described this additional material as a narrative bridge to Doomsday rather than a standard extended cut. That language is deliberate and interesting. One of the theories that gained traction online, and it's a theory, not a confirmed plot detail, is that the new footage will show Doom somewhere in the background of events we've already seen. Perhaps during the final battle, when Tony snaps, perhaps earlier. The idea being that the cosmic energy released by Tony's use of the Infinity Stones was something Doom was able to detect or even partially absorb or study from wherever he was watching. I'm not sure I fully believe that one. It feels a bit like the kind of retroactive insertion that makes people roll their eyes, but the emotional logic of it is interesting. The idea that the EMCU's greatest heroic act, Tony's sacrifice, also radiated consequences outward into the multiverse in ways nobody accounted for. What I think is more likely and more interesting is that the new footage simply contextualizes Doom's awareness of Earth 616 as beginning earlier than we knew. Not that he was literally standing behind a pillar at the Battle of Earth, but that events of that magnitude send ripples through dimensional space, and a man monitoring those fault lines would have taken note. The reported plot also contains one detail about Steve's situation in the present that's particularly grim. According to leaked descriptions, Steve and Peggy had a son together during those years in the past, about a boy named James Rogers. And Doom, in one of the film's early confrontations, kills James in front of Steve, in order to make a point, in order to demonstrate with absolute clarity that he is not interested in negotiation or sentiment, and that he views Steve's choice to stay in the past not as a romantic act of love, but as the selfish decision of one man that caused the deaths of people Doom cared about. That's a brutal way to frame it, but it's also as far as Doom is concerned, just accurate. To be honest, I've spent a fair amount of time thinking about that reported scene and what it asks the audience to feel. Because Steve isn't wrong to have wanted a life. He earned it. He'd given everything. But I deserve to rest isn't a defense against unintended consequences, and Doom's grief is real, even if his methods are monstrous. The film, if it does this well, will put us in a position where we understand both men and can't fully excuse either. And Chris Evans coming back for exactly this, not a cameo, not a victory lap, but a confrontation with the cost of his most personal choice, is a more interesting use of his return than anything else they could have done. Doom's plan, as described in the leaked plot details, isn't destroy the world or rule the world in the conventional sense. It's something stranger and in its own way more coherent. He wants to let the multiverse collapse and then rebuild it. The full version of the theory goes like this. Doom has concluded, after years of research and failed experiments and personal catastrophe, that the multiverse is terminally unstable, that incursions will keep happening, that no amount of patching or defending individual universes will solve the underlying problem because the problem isn't any specific breach, it's the structure itself. The branching, proliferating chaos of infinite timelines and parallel realities creating constant dimensional interference. You can't fix it piecemeal, you have to start over. So his plan is not to stop the incursions, his plan is to survive them, control them, and use the resulting cosmic wreckage to assemble a new reality. A single, stable, unified world built from the best preserved fragments of everything that was destroyed, under his governance. Because if you're going to rebuild reality, you do not want the person in charge to be a committee of reactive heroes who can't agree on anything. You want someone with a plan and the will to execute it. He calls this Battle World in the comics, and leaked set footage, concept art from former Marvel concept artists, and production details all point toward this being exactly where the film is heading. Now there's something important about how the rumoured plot frames Doom's motivation that I think gets glossed over in most of the theory discussion. He's not purely power hungry, he started this because he lost people. His family died because his experiment to prevent an incursion failed, and somewhere in that grief, his thinking calcified into something absolute. If you can't save the old world, build a better one. If you can't prevent the loss, control what comes after. That's a very human response to catastrophic grief, taken to its logical and terrible extreme. The specific mechanics of how he intends to accomplish this involve a few components that the theories have been piecing together. The first is his own considerable combination of science and sorcery. Doom in the comics is able to operate across both domains simultaneously, and his armour is as much a magical object as a technological one. The second component involves the TVA, the Time Variance Authority, which we'll get into in more detail in the next section because there's a lot there. And the third component, which I find the most fascinating, involves a child. There's also the matter of how Doom is presented in terms of sheer ruthlessness in the early confrontations. The reported killing of James Rogers is one example. There are also reports of Doom weaponizing the Sentinels, the giant mutant hunting robots from the X-Men universe, which in Magnato's Genosha are obviously a particular kind of pointed threat. The idea of Doom getting his hands on the Sentinels and redirecting them toward his own ends speaks to something about his character. He doesn't build new tools of oppression from scratch when perfectly functional ones already exist. He's efficient, he repurposes. There's a theory, separate from the leaked plot, more in the realm of fan analysis, that Doom's plan also has a personal emotional dimension related to the specific character of the Fantastic Four's universe. In that world, Reed Richards is one of the most respected scientific minds on the planet. And Doom hates Reed Richards with a particular and long-standing passion that in the comics has always been as much about envy and wounded pride as any actual ideology. The theory suggests that part of what Doom wants is to build a world in which Reed Richards either doesn't exist or doesn't get credit for anything, which is, if true, absolutely petty and also completely in character. What I find compelling about Doom as a villain is that his plan has a kind of internal logic that forces you to engage with it rather than simply dismiss it. The multiverse is unsustainable, and someone needs to make a hard decision about it is not an obviously wrong premise. His conclusion that he is the right person to make that decision, and that the method should be letting everything fall apart so he can rebuild it, is where the wheels come off. But you can follow the reasoning to that point without it feeling like cartoon villainy. And that's the foundation a good villain needs. The question the film will apparently leave partially unanswered, which is appropriate for a story that continues in Secret Wars, is whether Doom actually pulls it off, whether the plan works. And based on what the leaks describe, the answer seems to be yes, at least partly. Doom wins, the world gets remade, and whatever comes next happens in that remade world. That's a different kind of Avengers ending than we've seen before. Since we're already deep in the territory of how Doom intends to reshape reality, this is a natural place to talk about the TVA and what happens to Loki, because if the leaked plot details are to be believed, what Doom does to the Time Variance Authority is one of the most significant single events in the film. To understand why, it helps to remember where we left things at the end of Loki Season 2. Loki had reached the end of a long, winding journey from self-interested schemer to something genuinely heroic, and his solution to the problem of the TVA, which had been propping up a single sacred timeline by pruning every branch and variant, was to become the structural support himself. He wove himself into the branches of the world tree, holding the multiverse together through sheer will and an almost incomprehensible act of sustained sacrifice. He gave up his freedom, his relationships, his ability to be present in the world. He became the thing that keeps timelines alive and branching, sitting at the locus of the multiversal structure in a kind of eternal solitary guardianship. It's one of the more genuinely affecting endings any MCU character has received, precisely because it's not triumphant. It's quiet and alone, and costs him everything he'd come to value. Now, according to the leaked Doomsday plot, Doom travels to the TVA, and he takes Loki's power. The method described is essentially killing him, removing the force that was holding the branches in place, collapsing them back inward, eliminating nearly every branching timeline, and leaving only one surviving reality, or none, and then building from scratch. The specific details vary slightly across different leak sources, but the core of it is consistent. Doom uses the TVA as a mechanism, and Loki is what he takes from it. Tom Hiddleston is confirmed in the Doomsday cast. What that means precisely, whether Loki has some additional role before his power is taken, whether there's a genuine confrontation, whether Doom killing or consuming him is on screen or implied, is not confirmed. But the confirmation that Hiddleston is in the film at all, combined with the leaked plot beats, suggests that Loki's presence is significant rather than a brief cameo. There's something properly sad about this if true. Loki spent 2 seasons learning that he didn't need to be the most important person in the room, that the people he loved were worth protecting even at personal cost, and he made the largest sacrifice the story had for him. And if what comes next is someone finding that sacrifice and dismantling it to use as fuel for their own agenda, that's not a heroic death. That's being used, which is, in a darkly appropriate way, exactly the kind of fate Loki spent his entire arc trying to escape. The Void is also reportedly part of the film, which connects to all of this. The Void, established in the Loki series as the place, at the end of time where pruned variants are sent, a desolate wasteland of accumulated, discarded realities, has also featured in Deadpool and Wolverine as a setting. The theory, supported by leaked details, is that the Void becomes relevant to Doomsday as either the space through which Doom accesses the TVA, or more interestingly, as the foundation material for Battleworld. If you're building a patchwork world from the remnants of destroyed universes, the void, which has been collecting those remnants for the entire history of the TVA's operations, is a reasonable place to start. This would give the void a narrative significance it didn't fully have in either of its previous appearances. It was always this evocative, ominous backdrop, a graveyard of realities. Using it as raw material for the thing Doom builds feels like proper payoff for that concept. There's also the interesting question of what Doom actually does with the power he takes from Loki. In the comics context, the Secret Wars storyline, which is the clear source material for where these two films are heading, has Doom acquiring godlike power and using it to become the literal ruler of everything that remains. If he absorbs the power that was keeping the multiverse's branches alive and then redirects it toward building Battleworld, he essentially goes from being a very formidable villain to being something functionally divine. The films would need to handle that carefully. A character who is effectively omnipotent is difficult to tell stories around, but given that Secret Wars is the next film and presumably involves some kind of opposition or reversal, it's presumably just the end state of Doomsday, rather than a settled conclusion. What I keep coming back to is the dramatic irony of it. Loki's sacrifice was supposed to protect free will. It was supposed to mean that people across infinite timelines got to live their lives without a single authoritarian timeline pruning their possibilities. And Doom is going to take that sacrifice and use it to do the opposite, to collapse everything into one reality that he controls. That's not just a plot beat, that's a thematic statement about what happens to the sacrifices of idealists when pragmatists with power come along. Now let's talk about the X-Men properly, because I think they deserve more than a brief mention in the context of, and also, these characters are there. Their inclusion in Doomsday is, to me, one of the most emotionally loaded elements of the whole project. The original Fox X-Men films began in 2000. Patrick Stewart played Professor Xavier. Ian McKellen played Magneto. The franchise ran for almost 20 years, went through reboots and timeline reshuffles, and continuity problems that require a dedicated spreadsheet to fully map, and produced some genuinely great individual films, alongside some that we don't need to linger on. Logan in 2017 felt like a real ending for that version of the characters, specifically for Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. A quiet, devastating, earned conclusion. And yet here we are. Stewart is 85, McKellen is 85, and they're in an Avengers film together with the Fantastic Four and the MCU heroes. That's a sentence I genuinely couldn't have imagined being true a few years ago. The question is always, why now? And I think the honest answer is twofold. The practical answer is that Disney acquired Fox's film library when it acquired the studio, and the X-Men characters became available for MCU use. The story answer, the more interesting one, is that a film about universes colliding is precisely the right context for characters from a different universe to appear. It's not a contrivance, it's structurally appropriate. These characters being from a different continuity is the whole point. What we know about the state of the X-Men universe when Doomsday begins is suggestive. Magneto is ruling Genosha. For anyone who followed the comics or the earlier films, that's a loaded image. Genosha was, in various storylines, a mutant nation that became a mutant massacre. The history of that place in Marvel lore is one of the bleakest in the franchise. If, in the X-Men timeline, Magneto has actually managed to build a stable mutant homeland there, with his own royal family, with something resembling peace, then he's achieved what he spent decades fighting for, which means he has something enormous to lose. Reports indicate that Doom gets his hands on the Sentinels and repurposes them in the X-Men universe, which, in the context of Genosha, is pointed in the most specific and horrible way possible. Sentinels were built to hunt and kill mutants. Magneto built his utopia in a world where that threat exists. If Doom weaponizes those machines, for whatever purpose, toward whatever end, He's striking at the thing Magneto most wanted to protect. The Maximoff variants are interesting too. In the MCU, Wundu Maximoff is a figure with an enormously complicated history. She died, probably, at the end of Multiverse of Madness. In the X-Men universe, Wanda and Pietro once existed as Magneto's children. Magneto having Wanda and Pietro variants as part of his Genosha family is the kind of detail that's doing a lot of emotional work quietly, because it gives him something personal to fight for beyond political philosophy. And then there's the Wolverine question, which I mentioned earlier, and haven't resolved because it hasn't been resolved. Hugh Jackman is not on the confirmed cast list. Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool is also absent. The theories around this range from their hidden surprises being kept for a trailer reveal to they're genuinely not in Doomsday and will appear in Secret Wars instead, to Logan's story is complete, and Hugh Jackman chose not to return for this. Honestly, I could see any of those being true. The Russo brothers have consistently kept their genuine surprises hidden until they need to reveal them. Tony surviving Infinity War was kept out of marketing for a long time, and the Avengers Assemble moment in Endgame was never shown in a trailer. They know how to protect the things that matter. What I think is most interesting about the inclusion of these original X-Men actors, beyond any plot function, is what it represents for an audience. For a lot of people, Patrick Stewart as Professor Xavier and Ian McKellen as Magneto are formative. They defined how those characters felt and sounded before many MCU fans had ever picked up a comic book. Having them in the same space as the Avengers for the first time, even briefly, even as part of something that ends badly for their world, there's a significance to it that goes beyond box office calculations. There's a version of this film where the X-Men universe gets to be shown at its best, at its peak, and then that's precisely what makes what happens to it devastating. You give people something to love before you threaten it. That's old storytelling logic, and it would give the X-Men's inclusion a weight that goes beyond nostalgia. Something that doesn't get discussed enough in the Doomsday theory space is the practical question of survival. If Doom's plan involves collapsing the multiverse, destroying the TVA, eliminating branching timelines, and building Battleworld from the wreckage, how does anyone live through that to appear in Secret Wars? And the cast for Secret Wars has substantial overlap with Doomsday, so quite a few people clearly do survive. The most coherent answer the theories have produced involves the quantum realm. The quantum realm, if you've been following the Ant-Man corner of the EMCU, is a subatomic dimension that exists outside normal space and time. It was introduced as the science-adjacent landscape Scott Lang navigates when he shrinks to subatomic scale. In Endgame, it became the mechanism for time travel. The quantum realm's unusual relationship with time allowed the surviving Avengers to travel through the time stream and execute the time heist. In Quantumania, we learned that the quantum realm contains entire civilizations, has its own ecology and history, and is large enough to serve as the setting for a complete narrative. The crucial property for our purposes, the quantum realm, exists outside normal space-time, which means that if universes are collapsing at the macro level, if reality itself is being restructured, someone sheltered inside the quantum realm might be outside the effect. Not immune necessarily, but out of reach, at least temporarily. The reported theory, backed by some leaked production details, is that Cassie Lang, Scott Lang's daughter, played by Catherine Newton, is the person who facilitates getting survivors into the quantum realm as the incursion reaches its critical point. This is structurally elegant. Scott Lang's technology, his legacy, living on through his daughter in a moment of genuine crisis. Cassie was shown in Quantumania developing her own suit, her own understanding of the technology, her own capability. If anyone in this story would know how to use the quantum realm as a refuge, it's the person who grew up with it as a family inheritance. Paul Rudd is confirmed in the Doomsday cast, so Scott is present. Catherine Newton hasn't been officially confirmed, but was reportedly spotted with production material. The theory has some support in the leaks and makes mechanical sense as a setup for Secret Wars, where the presumed starting point is a small group of survivors looking out at Battleworld and trying to figure out how to undo what Doom has done. There's something quietly satisfying about the quantum realm being the lifeboat here. It was the mechanism that saved everything in Endgame. Scott Lang found the solution to saving the universe while trying to find his way home from a subatomic dimension. For that same dimension to be where hope is preserved while everything else falls apart is a nice piece of thematic continuity. One detail worth adding: in the Secret Wars leak that's been circulating, the story reportedly takes place 8 years after Doomsday's ending, with Battleworld already established as the singular remaining reality. That 8-year gap suggests that whoever survives doesn't immediately find a way back or immediately mount a successful challenge to Doom's order. There's a long stretch of time, of Doom ruling, of the world having adjusted to this new reality, before the events of the second film. That's an unusual structure for a superhero sequel, but it's interesting. It suggests the second film is genuinely about dismantling something that has had time to calcify rather than immediately reversing an acute crisis. And Cassie Lang being the one who steered people into the quantum realm, spending 8 years in a subatomic refuge while Doom's Battleworld exists above, and then being part of the group that emerges to challenge that reality, is a character arc with real stakes. She'd be the keeper of the survivors, the person who made the choice to preserve whatever she could when preservation was the only available option. I want to come back to that nursery scene, because I've been thinking about it since First Steps came out, and I don't think the theories are giving it nearly the weight it deserves. Franklin Richards, in the comics, is one of the most powerful beings in existence. Not powerful in the way Thor is powerful, or Wanda is powerful. Not can lift enormous things or can reshape matter within certain limits. Franklin Richards, at full development, at the point his abilities have matured, can create universes. Not metaphorically, literally. He has created pocket universes to preserve dying realities. His power operates at the level of cosmic architecture. He is, by some measures, more powerful than the Celestials, who are the ancient beings who shaped the fundamental structure of the Marvel cosmos. He was born during the main events of First Steps. Franklin Richards starts out as an infant in the AMCU. His powers are already manifesting in ways that seem to have saved his mother's life during a complicated birth. Reed and Sue stand in that film's final moments, contemplating a child they love, and also slightly fear, because they understand enough to know that what he contains is beyond their ability to fully predict or manage. And then Dr. Doom visits him, in private, while Sue is out of the room. Doom is not a sentimental man who makes social calls. He is not someone who drops by to coo at babies out of neighbourly friendliness. If Victor Von Doom, monarch of Latveria and one of the most calculating minds in Marvel's mythology, is standing in that nursery holding his mask and looking at Franklin Richards, he has a reason. And that reason is almost certainly that he knows or suspects what Franklin's power is. And he's thinking about how it fits into his plan. Here's the theory. Doom's plan to build Battleworld requires more than stolen power from the TVA or Loki. It requires the ability to actually create, to forge a new reality from raw multiversal material. In the comics, Doom acquires the power of the Beyonders, which are cosmic entities of staggering capability, to accomplish this. The EMCU doesn't have the Beyonders established, but it does have a baby boy in a Baxter Building nursery who can eventually create universes. The theory, which I find compelling, is that Doom's long game involves Franklin Richards. Not necessarily in a kidnap the child way, though there are other leaks suggesting Doom targeting children, of heroes more broadly, but in a more subtle sense. He's watching, he's calculating how Franklin's power, at some point down the line, might be the key to actualizing what he's building. You can collect all the cosmic power in the multiverse, but if you need someone to actually make something from nothing, you need a very specific kind of power. And the only being in the MCU who demonstrably has it is currently teething. This would also explain why the Fantastic Four are confirmed for both Doomsday and Secret Wars. Reed and Sue's story doesn't end at the crossover. Their child is central to how this all resolves, or doesn't resolve, in the second film. Pedro Pascal and Vanessa Kirby aren't just bringing texture and character work to a large ensemble. Their family is the crux of something. There's also something interesting about the dynamic between Doom and Reed Richards that the EMCU gets to play with here for the first time properly. In the comics, Doom's hatred of Reed is one of the great ongoing antagonisms. He thinks Reed is arrogant, that he got the credit for work Doom was more deserving of, that Reed's entire heroic identity is built on a foundation of accidental luck and good press, and yet Doom consistently has to measure himself against Reed's mind, because it's the only mind he considers worth the comparison. Now, Reed's son might be the most powerful being ever born. How does a man like Doom hold that knowledge without it consuming him? Does he want to control Franklin? Destroy him before he becomes ungovernable? Recruit him for Battleworld's construction? That's a fascinating thread for two films to pull on. The Steve-Doom confrontation, Steve facing a man whose family died because of a choice Steve made with entirely good intentions, is the kind of scene that can only work if the film trusts its audience to hold two uncomfortable truths at once. The reported Doomsday plot asks you to look at that same choice from the outside. From the perspective of a man in another universe who watched a dimensional fault line grow in his world, who ran experiments to try to understand and stop it, who failed, who lost his family, and who eventually traced the origin of his suffering to a soldier from another timeline who decided he wanted to retire somewhere he didn't belong. Steve didn't mean to cause harm. Steve didn't know, but Doom's people are dead regardless of whether Steve knew. That's a genuinely uncomfortable position to put a legacy character in. And it's interesting precisely because neither man is simply wrong. Steve had good reasons for what he did. Doom has understandable reasons for how he feels. The film is using them as a collision of two valid perspectives that have catastrophic consequences for everyone around them. There's also the reported detail that Doom shows Steve around Latveria, takes him to the castle, the seat of his kingdom, and makes him look at what Doom built and what was destroyed, shows him the consequences. One of the masked witches in Doom's court apparently impersonates Peggy Carter at some point, which is an extraordinarily cruel thing to do to Steve Rogers, and also exactly the kind of thing a man like Doom would consider fair. If you want someone to understand the weight of what their choices cost you, you make them feel it in the most personal register available. Chris Evans coming back for this specific story, not for a victory lap, not for a warm cameo, but to be held accountable for the downstream consequences of his most private act, says something about what the Russo brothers are interested in doing with legacy. The EMCU heroes have been celebrated for a long time. Phase 4 and 5 were often criticised for not putting enough genuine pressure on its characters. This, if it plays out as theorised, is the opposite of that. There's also the question of where Steve ends up at the film's end. If Doom wins, if the multiverse collapses, if Battleworld is what remains, where is Steve Rogers in that reality? Is he one of the survivors in the quantum realm, waiting for another chance? Does he sacrifice himself in a final confrontation with Doom that serves as a kind of penance? Does he and Doom find some unexpected common ground in their grief, even briefly, before everything collapses anyway? I don't know, and honestly, a lot of the specific beat-by-beat details in the leaked plot I'm less certain about than the broader structural elements. The structural elements, 3 universes, incursions, Doom taking TVA power, Battleworld, survivors in the quantum realm, have been reported consistently enough across enough sources that they feel reliable. The specific scene details are harder to evaluate, but the Steve Doom confrontation as a concept feels so right, so thematically earned, that I'd be surprised if the film doesn't spend real time in it. It's the film's moral centre, the place where the story asks its hardest question. What are the costs of personal choices in a universe where the personal and the cosmic are the same scale of event? When your decision to live quietly somewhere peaceful turns out to have cracked the foundations of another man's world, what do you owe him? I don't think there's a clean answer to that. And the best MCU films have always been the ones that don't pretend there is. Assuming the leaks are broadly accurate, Avengers Doomsday ends with Doom winning. Not a partial victory, not a setback he recovers from, not a villain who almost succeeds. The Avengers cannot stop him. The multiverse collapses, and what replaces it is Battleworld, which raises the question, what is Battleworld actually? Because the word gets thrown around in the theory discourse as if it's self-explanatory, but it's a genuinely strange concept, and the strangeness matters. In the Jonathan Hickman Secret Wars comics, which are the clear inspiration for where these films are heading, Battleworld is a patchwork planet, assembled from the fragments of destroyed universes. Imagine taking pieces of different realities, a city block from one timeline, a nation from another, a landscape from a third, and fusing them together into a single functioning world. The borders between these zones are defined. Each region has its own rules, its own history, its own version of events, and over all of it, ruling from a castle at the centre, is God Emperor Doom. He's not just a monarch in the political sense, he is the literal, structuring force of the world. Battleworld exists because he wills it to exist. The laws of that reality are his laws. The religions of its inhabitants have incorporated him into their cosmology. And across the various domains, fragments of people from destroyed universes go about their lives. In many cases not even knowing that they're living in a reconstruction, that the world they inhabit is essentially a curated archive of what used to be. The production design work that's leaked from the Doomsday and Secret Wars sets is evocative. The concept art from a former Marvel concept artist who posted work on ArtStation before it was taken down depicted a battle world that drew on medieval and ancient aesthetics, castles, stone kingdoms, a mythic visual language rather than a futurist one. The 1602 universe from Marvel's comics, a storyline set in a version of Elizabethan England where all the Marvel heroes exist in that historical period, has been cited as a visual reference point. That's an interesting choice. It suggests that Doom's battle world isn't chrome and machinery and clean lines. It's older than that. It has the feel of something that has been sitting for a while, that has weight and history, that is not a fresh construction, but a palimpsest, a world written over the remains of other worlds, which is architecturally and emotionally exactly what it is. There's a set leak from the UK production, filmed via drone above walls of shipping containers 40 feet high, that showed what appeared to be castle and fortress architecture being constructed. That lines up with the concept art's aesthetic direction. The production design team seems to have landed on something consistent. What Battleworld actually means for the story comes down to this. It is not a dystopia in the conventional sense. It is not a ruined world. It is a functioning reality that happens to be under the absolute rule of one man who made himself its god. The people who live in it may be, in many ways, fine. The problem is what was destroyed to build it. Every universe that was sacrificed. Every version of every person who didn't make it into the reconstruction. Every timeline Doom deemed not worth preserving. And somewhere in the quantum realm, or the void, or whatever refuge exists at the edges of this remade reality, a small group of people who remember what was lost, who know that Battleworld is built on wreckage, and who will be, in Secret Wars, trying to do something about that. The Secret Wars leak describes the story taking place 8 years after Doomsday, with the survivors having spent that time either hidden or surviving within Battleworld's borders, before the challenge to Doom's rule begins in earnest. That's an interesting gap of time, long enough that Battleworld feels established and not fragile. Long enough that the question of whether it can or should be dismantled is genuinely complicated. Long enough for people on both sides of the conflict to have grown and changed in ways the audience won't immediately know about. There's a particular detail from the leaked concept art that I find quietly haunting. In Doom's castle at the centre of Battleworld, the design included a throne room that incorporated architectural elements from multiple different universes, as if the building itself was made of collected fragments, each piece from a different reality. A window from one world, a wall from another, a floor that belongs to a civilization that no longer exists anywhere else. Doom living in a house built from everything he destroyed, every day. That's either a statement of pride or a form of penance, maybe both. With Doom, it could easily be both, right? We've done the structural stuff, the backed by multiple sources stuff, the theories that have enough corroborating detail to feel at least plausible. Now let's talk about the theories that are probably not going to happen, but are entertaining enough to be worth a wander through. This is, I think, the best part of pre-release Marvel discourse. The speculative edges where people are just genuinely creative and a bit unhinged. The Tony Stark Echo theory? This one is probably wrong, but it keeps getting traction, so let's address it. The argument goes, Robert Downey Jr. is playing Doom, who looks like Tony Stark, and the EMCU never quite resolved Tony's legacy in a clean way after Endgame. There are AI systems running in the EMCU that Tony created. Jarvis evolved into Vision, Edith was given to Peter Parker, and his various suits and networks still operate on his designs. The theory is that somewhere in the film, one of those fragments, a Tony Echo effectively, surfaces to confront Doom. Not Tony returned, not a resurrection, but a recording that becomes unexpectedly, uncomfortably relevant. Is this likely? Probably not. It edges toward the kind of narrative trick that would frustrate rather than satisfy. But the emotional appeal of it is real. The idea that Doom's greatest antagonist, in a very specific and deeply uncomfortable way, is a version of himself, or at least of the man whose face he shares, is good enough to understand why people keep proposing it. The hidden Spider-Man theory. Tom Holland is not on the confirmed cast list. He is probably the most notable absence. Benedict Cumberbatch is also absent from official announcements, though Cumberbatch himself has since noted that he was wrong about Doctor Strange not appearing in the film. The theory around Tom Holland is that Marvel is specifically protecting the reveal of his presence because of how emotionally complex his relationship to RDJ's face would be. Peter Parker's mentor died in his arms. The sight of someone wearing Tony's face and voice as a villain would be, for Peter, a very specific kind of horror. The theory suggests that's exactly why it's being hidden, because that reaction, in the audience as much as the character, is too good to spoil before the film opens. I find this genuinely plausible. Not certain, but plausible. The Wanda return. Elizabeth Olsen has been wonderfully evasive when asked about Doomsday, delivering variations on, "I know nothing about this film," with the kind of precision that suggests she knows exactly what she's doing. Her MCU character's fate after Multiverse of Madness is technically ambiguous. She destroyed Mount Wundagore, which was the source of the Darkhold's power, and the implication was that she died in the collapse. But there was no body, no confirmed death. And in the comics, Wandu Maximoff has a deep and complex connection to Doom in multiple storylines. There are also Wanda variants in the X-Men universe, the Wanda connected to Magneto's royal family on Genosha. So there are multiple potential paths for the character's return, depending on which version of Wanda we're talking about. The EMCU? Wanda coming back and crossing over with her own variant would be complicated, interesting, emotionally dense, probably difficult to handle in a film that already has 3 universes worth of characters to service. Still, I think the question of whether Wanda returns is live. I wouldn't bet on it, but I also wouldn't bet against it. The Doom was always watching theory. The re-release of Endgame with new footage feeds this. The theory is that the new scenes will reveal Doom's presence, or at least his awareness, during events we've already seen. Not physically present at the Battle of Earth, but monitoring from his universe, observing the dimensional energy readings of Tony's snap, marking Earth 616 as the epicenter of multiversal disruption. This wouldn't require reshooting anything from the original film. It could be entirely new material. Doom in a lab somewhere, instruments registering an event of unprecedented scale, and him looking up from his screens with an expression no one can read because of the mask. Whether that's what the new footage contains or whether it's something simpler, we'll find out in September. But even if the theory is wrong about the specifics, there's something right about it conceptually. Tony's snap was the kind of event that would have registered across dimensional space. It would have been noticed by anyone paying attention. And Doom strikes me as exactly the kind of person who's been paying attention. The Eddie Brock Venom angle is more speculative than most, but it's out there. Tom Hardy appeared in the EMCU briefly at the very end of Venom. Let there be carnage, and there's a fragment of the Venom symbiote left somewhere in Earth 616. Whether that threads into Doomsday at all seems unlikely. There's already an enormous cast. But in a film about multiple universes converging, the question of what happened to that symbiote fragment is at least technically unanswered. And then there's the one that always surfaces for big Marvel films. The theory that the whole thing is somehow a dream, a simulation, a story being told by an in-universe narrator, or some other framing device that turns out to make everything that happened within it non-canonical. This theory is always wrong, and will always be wrong, because no one actually wants that. I mention it only because someone in every comment section brings it up, and it's worth putting to rest early. The genuinely wild theory I'll leave you with. Some fans have proposed that Doom's ultimate act at the end of Doomsday is not to destroy everything and rebuild, but to save it. That his stated plan of creating Battleworld is actually a cover for what he's really doing, which is building a kind of arc. That the Battleworld he creates is not a monument to his ego, but a preservation system. The only way he found to save anything at all from the incursions wrapped in the language of conquest, because Doom would rather be feared and victorious than understood and desperate. That under the armour and the mask and the rhetoric of absolute control, the plan was always just to make sure something survived. That's probably not what the film is doing. The leaks suggest it's more straightforward than that, and that Secret Wars is where the dismantling of his rule happens. But the idea of Doom as a tragic figure who saved everything by becoming the thing everyone needed to defeat, that's a story worth telling. Maybe that's what Secret Wars is building toward, and that's where I'll leave things for tonight, in the lobby of a film that isn't out yet. With all the possibilities still intact, all the theories still live, all the ways it could go still unresolved. There's something I keep coming back to as I think about all of this, which is how different the emotional texture of these theories is compared to what preceded it. The Infinity Saga theories, before Infinity War, before Endgame, were mostly about how the heroes would win. Whether Thor would get a new weapon, whether Tony would survive, whether Cap could lift Mjolnir. Which, yes, obviously he could, but still. They were theories about triumph, how the good guys pull it off. The theories around Doomsday are mostly about grief, about costs, Steve's retirement breaking something he didn't know he'd broken, Loki's sacrifice being hollowed out by someone who needed what it contained. Doom's plan rooted not in ambition but in loss, in the specific anguish of a man who tried to fix something and made it catastrophically worse. Magneto's utopia standing for exactly long enough to be worth destroying. The idea that the EMCU's heroism has been accumulating weight this whole time, and that weight is finally going to land. That's a different franchise than the one we started with. Not worse necessarily, just older, more aware of what things cost, which makes sense. These characters have been around long enough now to carry real history, and a story that ignores that history in favour of another clean victory would feel hollow. I think people would feel the hollowness even if they couldn't name it. What I find genuinely hopeful about Doomsday, even within all the melancholy of it, is that the people behind it seem to understand what they're working with. The Russo brothers don't do clean. Civil War didn't resolve cleanly. Infinity War ended with the heroes losing. Endgame earned its catharsis by spending a significant amount of time in genuine despair first. If they're doing that same thing across two films, spending Doomsday in genuine loss, building Secret Wars as the long way back, then the structure is right, even if the journey is uncomfortable. And honestly, a film that ends with Doom winning is a film that trusts its audience to come back. That's not something you do if you think people will walk away and not return. It's a dare. Come back and see how this ends. I think most people will. Between now and December, there will be more trailers, more cast announcements, more confirmed surprises, and denied leaks. The Endgame re-release in September will presumably tell us something we don't currently know. The theory landscape will shift. Some of what we've talked about tonight will turn out to be right. Some of it will be embarrassingly wrong. That's just how this works, and it's part of what makes the waiting enjoyable if you let it be. There's loads more to get into in future videos, a proper deep dive into the comic's Secret Wars run, and what it does that no adaptation has quite captured yet. A full character history of Victor Von Doom that goes beyond what we had time for here, a look at Franklin Richards and what the EMCU might actually be planning for him over the next decade. And once the Endgame re-release has been out for a bit and people have picked through the new footage, that'll be worth a whole video on its own. For now though, that's enough wandering for one night. Thanks for spending a few hours in this corner of the fandom with me. Rest well. Since we talked about Doom's character fairly briskly in Section 1, it's worth spending a bit more time with the specific elements of his history that the EMCU is apparently drawing from, because the comics canon here is genuinely rich and it clarifies a lot about why certain creative choices were made. Victor Von Doom grew up in Latveria in poverty. His mother, a woman named Cynthia, made a deal with Mephisto, Marvel's devil figure, and her soul was taken as payment. Doom's entire arc in the earliest and most mythologically dense version of his origin is about a son trying to free his mother's soul from hell. He became a sorcerer partly for that reason. He studied at university alongside Reed Richards, their rivalry beginning there. An experiment failed. Accounts differ on whether it was Doom's error or Richards who introduced a flaw, and Doom's face was scarred. Not severely, but Doom couldn't accept even a minor imperfection. He had a mask forged, put it on, while the metal was still hot, and the burns made the scars worse. He did it deliberately, or accidentally, depending on which writer's version you're reading. Either way, the mask went on, and it never came off. That's a character whose foundational wound is pride and perfectionism, and the refusal to accept that he could be at fault, and then a life spent building something extraordinary from that wound. What the MCU's version appears to streamline is the emotional origin, a man who ran experiments to prevent incursions, failed, and lost his family. The armour and the mask serve the same psychological function as in the comics. You don't let people see the damage. What's interesting is that the EMCU doesn't need to spend time establishing whether Doom thinks he's justified. That part is already built into his bones. There's also the magical dimension of Doom's character that tends to get underemphasized. In the comics, Doom is one of the most powerful sorcerers on Earth. He studied his mother's occult texts with Morgan Le Fay, with various ancient and cosmic sources of power. His magic isn't the elegant geometric constructs of Doctor Strange or the chaos-based reality warping of Wandu Maximoff. It's older feeling, more bound to ritual and will, more rooted in a kind of dark religious tradition. It's the magic of a man who made deals with the devil and studied every grimoire he could find. That combination, genuinely world-class technology and genuinely world-class sorcery, is what makes him so difficult to plan against. Most opponents can be handled by either advanced tech or powerful magic. Doom doesn't have a weak flank. You can't out-science him and you can't out-magic him, and when he combines both approaches, you run out of options quickly, which is presumably part of why the heroes in Doomsday apparently can't stop him. There's a concept in the comics, used in various Doom stories, of the Doom Protocol, which is basically the principle that if you give Victor Von Doom enough time and information, he will find a solution to any problem. He will. It might be a solution everyone else finds monstrous. It will almost certainly be a solution that requires his being in charge of the outcome. But he will find it, and he will be right, in his own terms, that it works. Applying that to the incursion problem is fascinating. The MCU hero's approach to the incursions, based on what the leaks describe, is essentially defensive. Find them, warn people, try to limit damage. Doom's approach is offensive in the most total sense. Stop patching the house, demolish it, build a new one with no structural flaws. He's not wrong that his solution addresses the root cause. He's catastrophically wrong about whether it justifies what he does to accomplish it. The reported detail about Doom's Luthvarian castle and the masked witches in his court is worth dwelling on a moment. In the comics, Doom has a long association with occult practitioners in Latveria, a whole tradition of Romani magic tied to his mother's history. The masked witches feel like a nod to that. They also, functionally, make his court feel uncanny in a way that simple technological power wouldn't. Doom inhabiting a space that's simultaneously sci-fi fortress and something out of a darker kind of fairy tale that's visually and tonally interesting. It puts him in a slightly different register from the other EMCU villains, who have mostly been tech-based or cosmic power-based, rather than this combination of the ancient and the cutting edge. And then there's the way his name resonates through the story. Doom. The word itself carries weight in a way that most villain names don't. Thanos is a name that sounds appropriately alien. Loki is a name from mythology, but Doom is just an English word, and it means what it means: ruin, fate, an end that cannot be avoided. The character's name is not a superhero alias. It's a title he took for himself, or one that attached to him, depending on the version. The first time someone in Doomsday says his name as a full sentence, Dr. Doom, out loud in the MCU proper, in an Avengers film, it's going to land with a particular weight. I'm curious to see how the Russo brothers play that moment. One more thing about the RDJ casting worth adding. In the comics, there are multiple storylines where Doom and Tony Stark have direct extended confrontations, and a few where they're uneasy allies against a greater threat. What those stories always make clear is that they understand each other in a way neither of them particularly wants to admit. They're the same kind of person with different values. When they argue in the same language. Engineering, pragmatics, who has the better plan. There's no argument about principles because they share most of the same principles. They just disagree about what those principles permit. That dynamic between Tony Stark's legacy and Victor Von Doom's present tense existence played through the character psychology of two performers who've both been in this franchise for very different amounts of time. It's a rich thing to build a film around. Let's actually go through the confirmed cast in some detail, because I think there's more story inference available from who's in the film than gets discussed. The shape of an ensemble tells you something about the story it's serving. On the Earth 616 side, you've got Anthony Mackie as the new Captain America, Sebastian Stan as Bucky, Paul Rudd's Scott Lang, Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova, Tom Hiddleston as Loki, Chris Hemsworth as Thor, Letitia Wright's Shuri, Tenoch Huerta Mejia's Namor, Winston Duke's M'Baku, Danny Ramirez as the new Falcon, and Simu Liu's Shang-Chi. And the full Thunderbolts roster carries over: David Harbour, Wyatt Russell, Hannah John Kamen, Lewis Pullman as the Sentry. That's already an enormous room of people with complicated histories before you've added anyone from another universe. That's a dense group of people, and what's interesting is what it implies about where Earth 616 sits when the film begins. Sam Wilson's Captain America is the new face of the franchise's heroic tradition. Shuri as Black Panther represents Wakandu's generation transition. The Thunderbolts, now the new Avengers, bring a whole different energy to the ensemble. Characters who were never straightforward heroes, who've been operating in morally complicated spaces. Yelena Belova is not Steve Rogers. Wyatt Russell's John Walker has spent the entire show history being wrong about things in instructive ways. Lewis Pullman's Sentry is a character with a secondary personality, the Void, that is essentially a force of destruction in human form. That group having Avengers in front of their name by the time Doomsday begins is a statement about how the MCU's heroic identity has evolved. The Fantastic Four, Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm, Ebon Moss-Bachrach as Ben Grimm, The Thing, Joseph Quinn as Johnny Storm. This team comes from a universe with a very different history than Earth 616's Avengers. Their world never had a snap, never had a Thanos problem in the same way, never had the post-Endgame institutional wreckage. They've been operating as explorers, scientists, a family unit that faces extraordinary things together. The culture shock of meeting the MCU Avengers and of entering a conflict on the scale of multiversal incursions should be part of what the film explores. Reed Richards deserves a mention as a character because he's specifically Doom's most personal antagonist and is played by Pedro Pascal, who is an interesting choice. Pascal has a warmth and a kind of wry, slightly weary intelligence to how he performs that suits Reed well. He's brilliant but not cold, confident but not arrogant, which is the right balance for a character who exists in constant contrast to Doom's version of those same qualities. Their interaction in this film, if given room to breathe, has the potential to be the franchise's most interesting hero-villain dialogue. And then the X-Men group, which still feels slightly dreamlike to say out loud. Patrick Stewart is back as Charles Xavier, Ian McKellen as Magneto, Rebecca Romijn's Mystique, James Marsden's Cyclops, Alan Cumming as Nightcrawler. Good, he was excellent in that role, and it's been too long. Kelsey Grammer as Beast, and Channing Tatum as Gambit, following his appearance in Deadpool and Wolverine, which suggests that cameo was always meant to be a doorway into this. The original Fox X-Men films had an enormous cultural footprint at a particular moment in superhero cinema history. Before the EMCU existed, before the current model of franchise building became standard, the X-Men films were what a serious, expensive, character-driven superhero film looked like. They shaped expectations and vocabulary for an entire generation of audience. Bringing those actors back is not purely about nostalgia, though that's part of it. It's about acknowledging a lineage. The notable confirmed absence that's been generating a lot of discussion. Mark Ruffalo? He's confirmed to not be in Doomsday. Reports suggest this may be related to a contractual or creative dispute rather than a story decision, and he's expected to appear in a different upcoming MCU project. The Hulk not being in a major Avengers film is unusual, and his absence creates a specific gap in Earth 616's defensive capability that the film presumably has to acknowledge somehow, even if briefly. Chris Evans' return as Steve Rogers deserves its own note here. The announcement was made separately from the main cast reveal, as its own moment, and the reaction was significant. He hasn't been in the MCU in a major role since Endgame. Whatever the terms of his return, whether this is a one-film cameo or the beginning of something more, the choice to centre him in the film's most morally complicated relationship with Doom feels like a deliberate, creative decision rather than a fan service addition. There are unconfirmed but widely reported presences. Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange, who has since acknowledged he was wrong to say he wasn't in it. Tom Holland as Spider-Man, who is absent from official announcements in a way that has become conspicuous enough to be its own story. Hayley Atwell as Peggy Carter, whose appearance would be particularly interesting in the context of Steve's storyline. These are the figures the film may be protecting for reveals. What the ensemble as a whole suggests, to me, is a story that is genuinely interested in multiple generations and philosophies of heroism meeting under extreme pressure. You have the old guard, Steve Rogers, Thor. You have the next generation, Sam Wilson, Shuri, Cassie Lang. You have the complicated cases, the Thunderbolts team, Namor, Shang-Chi. You have a completely different universes team of first-generation heroes, the Fantastic Four. And you have survivors from a third timeline whose history with heroism is defined by a completely different set of social and political pressures, the X-Men. What connects all of them, what justifies their being in the same story, is that they're all going to be on the wrong end of Doom's plan, and how they respond to that, individually and together, is presumably what the film is actually about. One thing I think helps put Doomsday in perspective is stepping back and looking at the Multiverse Saga, phases 4, 5 and 6, as a complete unit, because a lot of people, including me honestly, found it frustrating in real time without fully seeing how the pieces were connecting. The Multiverse Saga began, really, with WandaVision, a show about grief and control and what a person does when the loss is too large to hold. Wanda Maximoff builds a reality bubble around a town in New Jersey because she cannot function in a world where Vision is dead. She creates something that looks like happiness. It's a thing the show frames as both deeply understandable and deeply wrong. And then she destroys it because she has to, because keeping it would require keeping everyone in it imprisoned. That tension between the human need for control over loss and the cost of acting on that need is, in retrospect, the thesis of the entire saga. Then Loki, about a man who spent his whole existence trying to be the most important person in the room and had to learn over 2 seasons that importance is a hollow currency when what matters is the people you're present for. His sacrifice at the end of season 2, weaving himself into the multiverse's structure alone, is the saga's clearest image of what maturity looks like in a Marvel context. He gave up the very thing he'd always wanted, significance, in order to protect something. The irony being that it's the most significant thing he ever did, and no one can know about it because the point is that it holds everything together from the invisible center. The Quantum Realm films, specifically Quantum Mania, introduced the Council of Kangs, which was the original plan for how these 2 Avengers films would be structured. Jonathan Majors was to be the central villain of the Multiverse Saga, with Kang variants across the multiverse representing the idea of a threat that cannot be stopped by defeating any individual instance of it. That plan changed when Jonathan Majors was convicted of assault in late 2023 and Marvel dropped him from future projects. Doom stepped into the conceptual space Kang had occupied, the villain who is not a single enemy but a worldview, a force that needs to be reckoned with at a structural level rather than punched out. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness set up incursions, the Darkhold, and the idea of universes pressing against each other. It also established that there are consequences, severe ones, to careless multiversal travel. Every time a consciousness forces itself into a universe where it doesn't belong, friction builds. And then across Phase 5 and the lead-in films, Captain America, Brave New World, Thunderbolts, the Marvels, the Fantastic Four film, the MCU has been assembling the pieces, new Avengers forming, new versions of old mantles, a Fantastic Four from another universe arriving in the MCU's orbit. Each piece feels, in isolation, like scattered setup, but they're all pointing toward the same event. The interesting structural thing about the Multiverse Saga, compared to the Infinity Saga, is that it's more distributed. The Infinity Saga had a single clear through line, the Infinity Stones being collected, leading to Thanos, that made each film feel like a chapter in a continuous story. The Multiverse Saga has multiple threads of different lengths approaching the same collision point. It's messier in some ways, more confusing to track, but it also means that Doomsday can serve as a genuine convergence, where things that felt disconnected suddenly reveal their connection. The incursion framework was always the destination. Wanda's reality warping, Strange's dream walking, the TVA's timeline pruning and subsequent dismantling, America Chavez's dimension punching travel, the snap and reverse snap, the time heist, all of it has been accumulating dimensional stress. Doom noticed, and now here we are. What I find particularly interesting about the Russo brothers returning for this is that they were absent for the entirety of Phase 4 and 5. They went off and made their own projects through their Ajibo production company. Coming back now, specifically for the two-film conclusion, suggests they felt this was the right story for them to tell, or that Figo fought to get them back, because the material required directors who understood how to manage massive ensembles without losing the emotional core. Infinity War and Endgame worked as ensemble films because each character got at least one moment that felt true to who they were. They didn't all get equal screen time, but the screen time they had was used efficiently and specifically. If the Russo brothers can replicate that with an even larger cast, 3 universes, dozens of characters, a villain of genuine complexity, then Doomsday has the structural conditions to be something exceptional. Whether they pull it off is a different question, but the attempt itself is worth acknowledging. Something that gets relatively little attention in the Doomsday theory space is Lewis Pullman's Sentry, which is surprising because the Sentry is, in the comics, one of the most complicated and dangerous characters Marvel has ever created. And he was introduced in Thunderbolts in a way that set up quite a few threads that Doomsday presumably picks up. Bob Reynolds in the MCU version is a broken man who volunteered for a superhuman enhancement procedure run by a military-industrial organization operating under CIA oversight. He was given the power of 1 million exploding suns, which is not a metaphor. That's approximately how the Sentry's power level is described. He can fly, he has effectively unlimited physical strength. He can manipulate matter at the molecular level. He can project energy on a cosmic scale. He is, when functioning, one of the most powerful beings on the planet. He also has a secondary personality called the Void. The Void is the equal and opposite force of the Sentry's light, the shadow that balance requires. When the Sentry shines too brightly, the Void emerges, and the Void is a force of annihilation. In Thunderbolts, we saw this tension play out. Bob trying to hold himself together, his psychological damage making it difficult to fully control the power he carries, the Void threatening to consume him and everyone around him. The film's resolution, where Bob apparently integrated himself into a version of the Void's power that was less destructive or found a kind of equilibrium, left his status somewhat ambiguous. He's alive, he's in the Doomsday cast, but what he represents in that film is a person with essentially limitless power whose reliability depends entirely on his mental stability. And the unconfirmed reports describe Doom as extraordinarily ruthless, someone willing to commit atrocities to make points. If something happens in Doomsday that destabilizes Bob Reynolds psychologically, and Doom is absolutely the kind of villain who would specifically engineer that, what the Void could do to the battle is difficult to overstate. There's a theory that Doom's plan involves, at some stage, deliberately triggering the Void in Bob, not because he wants a mindless force of destruction running loose, even Doom presumably doesn't want that, but because an unleashed Void would force the other heroes to divert enormous resources toward containing it, effectively removing them from the main fight. It's the kind of strategic play that aligns with how Doom thinks. He doesn't just fight harder, he changes the conditions of the fight. The Sentry in the comics is, when fully unleashed, a genuinely staggering force. There's a storyline where he defeats Galactus one-on-one, and another where he tears an alternate universe Thor in half. He's been destroyed and reconstituted more times than it's probably worth tracking. I don't say any of that to be dramatic. It's just that once you understand his power ceiling, adding him to a film where the heroes are already outmatched by Doom is a significant complication. Like a film that already has a flooding problem choosing to also install a volcano. What I find interesting about Bob Reynolds as a character is that unlike most of the others in the Thunderbolts team, his tragedy is not about choices he made in bad circumstances or loyalties he had to revise. His tragedy is about what was done to him without his understanding of what it would cost. He wanted to be good. He signed up for something because he wanted to help, and what he received in return was a power he can barely contain, and a second self that wants to unmake things. That's a specific kind of grief, for the person you thought you were going to be before you understood what you actually are. In a film where Doom is also a man whose attempt to do something he believed was good led to catastrophe, there's a quiet parallel there. Both men thought they were solving a problem. Both men ended up carrying something that costs everyone around them. The difference is that Bob knows he might be the problem. Doom is constitutionally incapable of believing that. Let me spend some proper time on Magneto and the X-Men universe's situation, because I think there's a lot of resonance in the reported details of their status that makes their eventual loss, if that's where the film goes, genuinely affecting rather than just dramatically convenient. Eric Lansher has been one of the defining characters in superhero fiction since the first X-Men film in 2000. Ian McKellen played him as a man shaped completely by the Holocaust, a survivor who concluded, rationally and with full evidence available to him, that the world would always try to destroy people like him and that the only protection was power. He's been wrong about methods consistently throughout the films. He's been right about the underlying threat with the same consistency. The through line of his character across the Fox franchise is the question of whether a world that has tried to exterminate you can ever be a world you live within safely. Charles Xavier's answer is yes, through patience and demonstration and the cultivation of mutual understanding. Magneto's answer is no, not until the power dynamic shifts. He's been cast as the antagonist because his methods tend toward violence and mass civilian threat. But in the moral framework of the X-Men mythology, his diagnosis has never been entirely wrong. Now the reports say he's finally achieved Genosha, a mutant nation, a space where his people are sovereign and protected. He has, in the world of the X-Men timeline, gotten the thing he spent decades fighting for. He has his royal family, which includes variants of the people he's lost. Wanda and Pietro. He has built something instead of just opposing something. And into that world comes Dr. Doom with the Sentinels. The Sentinels, in X-Men lore, are robotic mutant hunters originally designed by Bolivar Trask. They represent the institutionalized version of the human fear of mutants. Not individual prejudice, but systematic, mechanical extermination. Magneto has lived much of his life in the shadow of that threat, and if Doom is weaponizing them, for whatever purpose, whether it's to attack Genosha specifically, or to use them as general-purpose force multipliers, the symbolism is so specific and so targeted that it's almost hard to believe it's accidental. This is, presumably, intentional. The theory is that Doom is not just using the Sentinels as tools, he's using them as a message. He wants Eric Lansher specifically to understand the scale and the absolute nature of his power. To see the thing Eric feared most, the thing he dedicated his life to opposing, deployed against him by someone who could acquire and redirect it effortlessly. The emotional dimension of that attack is as important as the physical dimension. What Magneto's response to that would be, in the hands of Ian McKellen in his 80s with 2 decades of history in this role, is something I find myself genuinely curious about. Eric at full power is an extraordinary force. Manipulating metal is not a limited ability in a world that runs on infrastructure and has militaries with equipment and orbital installations and countless mechanical things that can be redirected. He's not a small player even now, but I suspect the film's interest is not in Eric winning a fight. It's in what it means for a man who built his utopia on the idea that power could protect his people to face a threat that his power cannot match. That's the deepest wound the story can deal him, and it aligns with what seems to be Doomsday's broader thematic interest in the cost of certainty. Charles Xavier's relationship with that wound would be different. Xavier has always known that safety cannot be guaranteed through force. His entire project has been about something harder and less secure than Magneto's approach. About persuasion, about patience, about building relationships across the divide. He's been proven right and wrong in different ways throughout the films, but in a crisis that no amount of human goodwill can prevent, his method has no tools either. Doom is not persuadable and is not interested in coexistence. The image of Patrick Stewart as Xavier, in whatever role he plays in Doomsday, confronting the collapse of both his world and Magneto's world simultaneously. That's a lot of history arriving at once. 2 old men who've been arguing for 20 years about the right way to navigate a world that doesn't fully want them there, both watching everything they built disappear. I don't know whether the film has the time to give that its full weight, but the material is there, and then there's the Channing Tatum Gambit angle, which I haven't mentioned yet. Tatum appeared as Remy LeBeau in Deadpool and Wolverine, a throwaway appearance for a character who had a decades-long production saga of his own before finally appearing on screen. He's confirmed for Doomsday. What Gambit's role in the X-Men universe storyline might be is unclear, but his inclusion suggests the film is interested in populating that universe with texture beyond just the most famous characters. Nightcrawler in particular, Alan Cummings' Kurt Wagner, is a character whose core qualities map interestingly onto what Doomsday is thematically. He's a person who looks frightening and alien to people who don't know him, whose appearance triggers fear, who has nonetheless consistently chosen gentleness and faith and care. In a story about whether the universe can be saved from someone who wants to remake it, Nightcrawler is the kind of character whose presence is quietly optimistic. His worldview, that grace is possible in dark places, is exactly the counterpoint a film this heavy might need. It's easy to think of the Fantastic Four's presence in Doomsday as being primarily about the Reed-Doom relationship and the Franklin Richards angle, and those are certainly central, but I think there's something broader that the Fantastic Four contribute to this story that's worth naming. The Avengers, at this point in the AMCU, are a very specific kind of organisation. They were formed in response to a threat, reformed in response to another threat, disbanded, reformed again, restructured multiple times, and have spent most of their existence in reactive mode. They respond to crises. They assemble when the alarm sounds. Their identity is fundamentally defined by opposition. There is a threat, and they stand against it. The Fantastic Four are not that. They are, in the original Stan Lee and Jack Kirby conception, that the MCU's First Steps film honours explorers. Scientists who venture into the unknown, not because something terrible is out there, but because they're genuinely curious about what exists beyond the edges of the known. They encountered the cosmic ray storm that gave them their abilities while doing something nobody told them to do. Their family formed not around a crisis, but around a shared drive to understand the universe. That's a different philosophical foundation, and it matters in a story about whether the universe's problems can be solved, because the Fantastic Four's approach to a problem like the multiverse is structurally unstable and collapsing would be different from the Avengers' approach. The Avengers ask, who is doing this and how do we stop them? Reed Richards asks, why is this happening and what does the physics of it actually require? Those are not the same question, and they don't lead to the same answer. Ben Grimm, the Thing, is worth thinking about separately for a moment. He's a man who was transformed into something inhuman, something he didn't choose, something that for a long time caused him enormous pain and self-recrimination, and he made his peace with it. He found that what he is, however he looks, however far it is from what he expected to be, can be used for something that matters. His arc is, in a way, the gentlest version of the MCU's central theme. You don't always get to choose what happens to you, but you get to choose what you do with it. In a film with Lewis Pullman's Sentry, who is wrestling with something inhuman inside him that he didn't choose either, but has not fully made his peace with, that parallel is potentially interesting. Ben Grimm has arrived somewhere Bob Reynolds hasn't yet, not because he's better or stronger, but because he's had more time with it, and because he has a family that held him through it. Johnny Storm, on the other hand, brings something the ensemble in First Steps made clear, and the Doomsday crossover will presumably use. He's the most emotionally uncomplicated person in any room. He's confident, he's fast, he leads with enthusiasm rather than strategy, and he has a wonderful tendency to say the thing nobody else is saying because everyone else is being tactful about it. In an ensemble film where everyone is carrying history and grief and complicated loyalties, Johnny Storm walking in and saying something obvious with complete earnestness is a useful narrative function. And Sue Storm, who deserves more attention than she typically gets in superhero ensemble discussions. She's the most powerful member of the Fantastic Four in raw terms. Invisibility is useful, but force fields and invisible constructs are one of the most versatile, offensive and defensive powers in the whole catalogue. She's also, in First Steps and in the comics, the person who holds the family together, not through authority or sacrifice, but through love as a practical act. She shows up. She pays attention. She doesn't let people fall apart if she can help it. Her having a child with cosmic power, and then having Doom appear in her home near that child, places her in an impossibly difficult position. The kind of impossible position that tends to bring out either someone's deepest fear or their deepest capability. I'd expect the film to use that pressure on Sue in ways that are specific to her rather than generic. The Fantastic Four crossing from their universe into Earth 616's ongoing crisis also creates a fun narrative problem that the film presumably has to address at some point. They're coming from a 1960s retro-futurist world into a 21st century world that has had 50 years of history they don't share. The Avengers they meet will have references, histories, losses, and cultural context that the Fantastic Four will have no frame for. That's potentially interesting if the film gives it any room. The awkwardness of encountering a version of a world you thought you knew and finding it occupied by a completely different set of stories. Let me spend a few minutes on some of the other confirmed cast members and what their presence in this story likely means, because a few of them are interesting in ways that don't get much theory discussion. Thor is confirmed and is played by Chris Hemsworth, who has been in this franchise since 2011. Thor's arc over the course of his MCU appearances has been one of the more complete character journeys in the franchise, from arrogant prince to reluctant king to man who had to learn to step back and let others lead. By the time of Love and Thunder, Thor was something like a wandering hero for hire, a god who had given his kingdom to someone else and wasn't quite sure what he was for anymore. He has enormous power and a complicated relationship with how to use it. In Doomsday, Thor's role is presumably significant simply by virtue of his power level. He's one of the Avengers who can credibly threaten a figure as formidable as Doom in direct confrontation. But more than that, Thor has a history with Doom's chosen mechanism in an indirect way. The TVA, the management of time and branching timelines, these are things that touch on Asgardian cosmology, on Yggdrasil, the world tree that Loki is now woven into. Thor losing Loki permanently, in a way that's different from all the other times he's lost Loki, is the specific grief the film might give him. Loki's death at Doom's hands, if that's what happens, would be the one that actually holds. And that's a different thing to watch Thor carry than the deaths we've seen before. Bucky Barnes, Sebastian Stan, has been in this franchise since the first Captain America film. His arc is probably the longest and most technically complete of any character in the EMCU. Brainwashed assassin to fugitive, to tentative ally, to fully present member of a team, to, in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, someone who has addressed the specific harm he caused and started building something that isn't defined by guilt. He's a man who has spent a very long time trying to get back to himself. His confirmed presence in Doomsday, alongside Steve Rogers' confirmed return, is the obvious reunion thread. Steve went into retirement and left Bucky behind in a complicated way at the end of Endgame, giving the shield to Sam rather than Bucky, which Bucky himself seemed to understand and accept, but which still represents a kind of letting go. Bucky's relationship with whatever Steve has become after all those decades in the past, and their reunion in a context this extreme, has obvious emotional weight. The Thunderbolts team, as a group, Yelena, Red Guardian, Ghost, US Agent, the Sentry, bring something to the Doomsday ensemble that the existing Avengers generation doesn't naturally have, which is a certain ease with moral compromise. These are not people who stand on principle. They've done bad things, some by choice and some by manipulation, and some by institutional requirement. They're more comfortable with the idea that the solution to a problem might not be clean, might not look heroic from the outside. In a confrontation with Doom, who has his own comfort with doing whatever the situation requires, that might matter. The people who know how to operate in grey space might be the ones who find angles that the more principled heroes miss. Shuri as the current Black Panther is interesting partly because of what she represents as a character, someone who inherited a legacy that was never meant to be hers, who stepped into it out of grief and necessity, and has been trying to make it her own ever since. In a film that's thematically engaged with the costs of choices made under pressure, Shuri's position is relevant. She chose to take the mantle in Wakanda forever, under circumstances that weren't ideal. The question of whether that choice was right, for her, for Wakanda, for the people who need a Black Panther, has been open. Namor's presence is also worth a note. Tenoch Huerta Mejia's Namor was in Wakanda forever, operating from a position of genuine anger about colonial violence and the protection of his people. Anger that was entirely legitimate, even when his methods crossed into something the film couldn't fully endorse. He and Shuri reached a kind of truce. His inclusion in Doomsday suggests that truce is held and that Talakan's interests align with the Avengers' interests when the threat is existential. Namor doesn't typically play well with others. His being there is a statement about how serious the situation is. Since Doomsday is very explicitly the first half of a two-film story, with Secret Wars arriving in December 2027, it's worth thinking about what Doom wins at the end of Doomsday actually sets up, and what kind of film Secret Wars would need to be in response. Jonathan Hickman's 2015 Secret Wars run, the comics this is drawing from, is structured unlike almost any superhero event story before or since. The action isn't in the fall of the multiverse, it's in what comes after. It's essentially set in the aftermath, asking, okay, Doom won. Now what? The reported details of the Secret Wars adaptation, that it draws on the Children's Crusade comic storyline, that it involves Battleworld as a medieval aesthetic patchwork world, that Doom rules it genuinely rather than as a tyrant in the traditional sense, suggest Marvel is attempting something tonally different from the phase-ending films we've had before. Endgame was a heist film followed by a battle film. It had a clear problem, a plan, an execution, a climax. What Secret Wars is describing is closer to a political drama inside an impossible situation, where the action dimension is almost secondary to the argument the heroes have to make. There's also the question of who the heroes of Secret Wars actually are. If Doomsday ends with most of the known EMCU characters either dead, integrated into Battleworld, or sheltering in the quantum realm, and Secret Wars takes place 8 years later. Then the central protagonists of the second film may be different from what you'd expect. The characters who survived in the quantum realm would have spent 8 years together in a very specific kind of pressure. They'd know each other differently. Some relationships would have deepened and some would have broken. The Cassie Lang who guided people into the quantum realm as an act of crisis management, and the Cassie Lang who emerges 8 years later as the person who's been holding everyone together through an impossible wait, that's a character with a story worth telling. One thing the Secret Wars comics do that the film will presumably adapt in some form, a version of Thor and a version of Captain America end up being significant forces within Battleworld itself, functioning within Doom's reality rather than opposing it from outside. The question of what people with strong moral compasses do when the world they're living in is wrong, whether they resist it at personal cost or learn to function within it while looking for a better option, is exactly the kind of question that suits characters like Thor and Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes. If Battleworld contains some versions of the people we know, variants who survived into Doom's constructed reality, living lives there, who may or may not remember what was lost, then the heroes returning from the quantum realm would be arriving in a world populated by reflections of their own dead. That's emotionally very complicated territory. In the comics, it's handled through the idea that different zones of Battleworld contain different versions of characters from different destroyed universes. The EMCU version might simplify this, but the core emotional situation, you come back to a world where your dead friends exist in a form you don't recognise, where they don't know you, where they've built lives you weren't part of, is haunting enough to use. What I think Secret Wars ultimately needs to argue, thematically, is not just Doom was wrong, because Doom wasn't simply wrong. He created a world that functions. He saved something from a collapse that was going to happen regardless. The argument Secret Wars needs to make is something more specific, that a world that functions under one man's absolute control, however well it functions, is missing something that makes reality worth inhabiting. That freedom, messiness, multiplicity, the right to exist without a curator, is not a luxury, but a necessity, and that the heroes dismantling Battleworld are not just defeating a villain, but making an argument about what reality should be. That's a big argument to make in a superhero film. I'm curious whether they're actually going to make it, or whether they'll find a way to simplify it into something more conventional at the end. There are a handful of things that don't fit neatly into any of the main theory sections, but are worth naming before we get to the close, because they're the kind of details that will probably mean something when the film actually exists and we can look back and say, right, that was the thing. The Void in Thunderbolts. The film made a point of portraying it as Bob Reynolds' secondary personality, with no connection to the TVA's wasteland at the end of time. That's a slightly odd choice if it doesn't mean something. The word is used twice in connected MCU material to refer to different things. The theory is that they're going to converge, that the Void in Bob Reynolds has some resonance with the Void in the TVA's cosmology, that perhaps they share an origin, or that Bob's inner void is somehow connected to that larger landscape, probably overthinking it. But worth noting, the reported plot detail about Doom's army of masked witches. This is a detail I keep coming back to. Doom having a court of practitioners is comics accurate, but their specific function in the leaked plot, one of them impersonates Peggy Carter to manipulate Steve Rogers, suggests they're being used as psychological operators rather than fighters. Doom's strategy in the leaked plot is as much about breaking people's will and certainty as it is about defeating them physically. The witches are part of that apparatus. They're a way of weaponizing the things people love. The absence of Bruce Banner and the Hulk. Mark Ruffalo is confirmed not to be in this film. The Hulk is one of the most powerful beings in the MCU. His smart Hulk form in Endgame was strong enough to survive the Infinity Gauntlet snap, though with significant injury. the story presumably has to address why he's not present. Whether this is handled through a brief explanation, whether Banner is referenced as being elsewhere on some mission, or whether his absence is simply unaddressed. Any of those choices tells you something about the film's priorities. The question of Wong. Benedict Wong's Wong has been the Sorcerer Supreme since Doctor Strange's title was in flux, and he's appeared in seemingly every MCU film for the last few phases as a kind of anchor for the magical side of the universe. He's not in the confirmed cast list. Whether he appears in a smaller capacity, whether his absence is significant, or whether he's simply not central to this particular story. Unclear. But Wong functioning as an exposition and logistics character in previous films makes his possible absence notable if the magical dimensions of the conflict are central to the plot. And finally, the Sam Wilson problem. Sam Wilson's Captain America has been the central MCU hero since Endgame. In many ways, the person carrying the symbolic weight of that mantle into the new era. Everything in the post-Endgame MCU has been building toward him being the Captain America of this era. But in a film where Steve Rogers is back, even temporarily, even in a complicated and morally fraught context, what does that mean for Sam? Does the film address it? Does Steve's presence undermine Sam's position at any point, even inadvertently, in a way the story has to navigate? This is, honestly, my biggest structural concern about the reported plot. Not about whether it's good, but about whether there's room to handle it with the care it deserves. Sam Wilson as Captain America is a real inheritance with real weight. Steve Rogers returning can't just ignore that inheritance. If the film is going to bring both of them back, it needs to be clear, in the text, in how the other characters respond, that Sam is not diminished by Steve's return. That Steve's presence is historical context, not competition. Fingers crossed